Thank you very much. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. The first school forum meeting that's a virtual meeting. If I could just take the first couple of minutes to try and outline how the meeting is intended to work and some of the ways in which we'll communicate across the room. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to scan everybody to see who's doing what and when. One of the first principles, if we could all turn our video and sound off, and when you raise your hand, I'll identify you, and if you could then turn your video and sound on, and then speak to the meeting. This first virtual meeting is allowed under the Coronavirus 2020 legislation, so it is a formal meeting of Schools Forum, and as you've probably gathered by the fact that Luciana was trying to get the video running, it's an open public meeting, and therefore it is being live streamed to across YouTube. Only members of School Forum and the supporting officers will be asked to speak at the meeting. Again, I remind you please to turn your microphone and your camera off unless you are speaking. If you could use the hands up function to indicate when you want to speak. I've got a little dashboard on the side of my screen, which I'm sure you've all seen before, which will show me when a hand is up, and I will then come to you and ask you to speak. And Brian hopefully will help me as well and point out when we've got somebody that needs to speak. The meeting will be a little more formal than certainly I'm used to, and I think our School Forum meetings are used to. Sadly, it becomes much more formal and a little less or more cold than it has been. I won't be able to scan the room to see who wants to speak. I'll have to rely upon you raising your hand. It will be quite a strict officers presenting reports and members being asked to make questions and comments, officers then answering those questions and comments with their hands up. So it becomes quite a staccato arrangement, but that's the most appropriate arrangement for us to follow with. If you have any technical difficulties during the meeting, please try and come back into the meeting if you can. The meeting will continue. If I, for whatever reason, drop off, Brian will take over the chairmanship. If for any reason we become inquorate, we will then suspend the meeting and either try and re-establish it or put it off for a later date. But obviously we will try and retain the session throughout the whole of the morning if we can. Other than that, unless anybody's got any questions from the introduction, I'm happy to move forward. If there are no questions, thank you. Then, if I can move on to the first item, which is apologies for attendance. Luciana, I believe we have one apology for attendance.
Yes, Paul, we have apologies from Paul Gibson from Ordinarily.
I don't have the name in front of me, so if we could make a note.
Sorry, Paul, we have apologies from Paul Gibson from Ordinarily.
One, I can't remember who it is. I'm sure Luciana's got a note of it, and she will then put that into the minutes. I think it was Paul Gibson from Ordinarily who can't attend. Is anybody else aware of any other colleagues who are sending their apologies? Thank you. If not, if I can move on to the minutes of the last meeting. All of the papers were in a URL that was in your invite, so I'm hoping that you've had a chance to read through them. So I'll quickly ask, please, for factual corrections to the minutes. I think I've noticed that Jay, for whatever reason, has been not included on the attendees, and I'm pretty sure Jay was at the last meeting, so Jay's name needs to go on the attendees list.
Thank you, I was there.
Yes, I thought you were. Are there any other factual corrections that colleagues would have seen? I noticed there are a couple of typos which I will pick up with Luciana later on. If there are no other factual corrections, and I can see no hands raised to point any out, if you're happy, I will sign these as an accurate record of our last meeting and file them with Luciana when I get the opportunity to physically see her and put pen to paper. Can we move on to matters arising from those minutes that are not covered by substantive items in the meeting? I'm looking through them and assuming most of the issues will be covered. There was one item I noticed that Lynn, I think I saw your name on the call, you were going to add a paragraph to the minutes about the out-of-borough independent non-maintained schools and the size of that particular level of funding. Page 13, the lower section, about the fourth bullet up from the bottom. Could we ask you, given that we haven't got it, to provide it in our next set of documents?
Yes, certainly, Paul. Sorry, that was a oversight on my behalf.
Okay. Are there any other items that colleagues would like to raise as matters arising from the minutes? No hands going up. So therefore, thank you for that. If we can move from item 34, which is the minutes, onto item 35, which is declarations of interest. Can I ask again by show of hand if there is anybody that has an interest that they need to declare that hasn't already been declared to Luciana and recognised in our declaration of interests? Okay, I can see no hands. No, fine. Then thank you. If we can move from declarations of interest onto the first substantive item, which is the revenue outturn. And looking at my crib sheet, which Lynn and Catherine provided to us. Catherine, I think this is your opportunity to share. And I think you're going to share your screen and take us through things.
Yes, I will, yeah.
Thank you. If I pass across to you.
Morning, everyone. Hopefully you can all see my screen.
I can, thank you. So I'm hoping everybody else can.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so, oh, sorry, now my mouse is going mad. Okay, so this is our outturn report. We had a net overspend of 1,785,000, which was 1.25% of the DSG budget. And with the deficit balance that we brought forward from the previous year, we've now got an overall deficit of 3.3 million, which is 2.35%. Last year, when we went over 1% of our DSG, we had to submit a deficit recovery plan, and the DfE have actually changed the rules on that this year, the conditions of that, and we don't have to complete one now, but they will just ask us as and when they want more information about what we're doing with that. As you can see from all the numbers at the bottom, we were, excuse me, I'm flying through this. From the numbers that we reported in January, we're only 24,000 over what we thought in January, so what we previously reported, so quite happy with that, really. So any questions that anyone has on this report?
So I'm opening up for questions. I've got a couple, but let's have a look. Has anybody got any questions? So perhaps I could ask some. Whilst I'm well aware of Pierre's legendary ability to control his budgets to incredible detail, I noticed that the growth fund was budgeted at 800,000 and the outturn was precisely 800,000. That strikes me as incredible management, but possibly slightly unlikely, and therefore the actual may well have been a different number than 800,000.
Yes, it was. It was underspent by nearly 200,000, and we've carried it forward into the new year.
So we may need to discuss how that's represented, because that has notionally inflated our deficit in the year by some 200,000 because we didn't spend that money, and notionally underwritten a potential further spend of 200,000 in 2021. So whilst I understand the process or what you're trying to achieve by doing that, the reporting would seem to be at odds with the facts.
Yes. We will be discussing with peers how we're going to be spending that 200,000 this year, but it is in. You're right. It's included in our deficit. Lynn, what's the best way to describe what we're going to do with this money?
Yeah. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, Paul, I completely take your point on board. Let us discuss that out with the meeting and consider the presentation of it. I completely take on board what you're saying. It's not the full 800 wasn't spent, and that 200 is in balances for further discussion with Forum and spend going forward. But I appreciate the presentation in that report potentially overstates the position, so we can correct that.
Thank you. And I know we've got as a major item coming up on one of our next and meeting in October, a session from peers on a wider picture of the growth fund. So perhaps we can cover that then. Thank you. Just a matter, do you submit these out-turn figures to DFE, and have they been submitted, or are these more for our internal consumption?
So this format more for you. Oh, sorry, Catherine, carry on.
Sorry. You say.
So there's a section 251 return that we will do. It's not done yet, but that will be done. That will open shortly, and we submit figures through that. But in terms of presentation for this report, it's purely for this meeting at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Then if we can perhaps resolve the issue and potentially make that the actual spend rather than the forecast spend, that I think would slightly change the presentation and reflect accurately what was spent during the year.
Yeah, we'll certainly look at that, pick that up, Paul. Thank you.
Luciana has just advised me that Ian doesn't have a hands-up facility. So Ian, more than happy if you come off your turn your microphone on and speak rather than work on the hands up if you need to say something. I'm happy for that.
Yeah, sorry, I think I've got an outdated version of Teams. Yeah, can Catherine and Lynn just confirm, looking at that, there's a 376,000 surplus in early years?
That was just the change in income that we had in the year. But everything that we've had in, we've spent. So this column is the initial budget. So this is what we were provisionally given and as an allocation. And what we actually ended up getting was the 10,063. So that's what that difference is. But we have spent everything that we've had in.
Right. So in terms of the contingency that was taken last year.
So Ian, sorry, if I can just pop into that. So as you know, that once we know final figures for the year and we know what things look like shortly, we'll do the usual summer final reconciliation on the old financial year to ensure that everything's been tied up. So it'll be picked up as part of that. But as you know, we set the sort of reserve element and we adjust for it at year end because we know that there's the potential, as we've looked at in previous years, that either money might be clawed back or there might be additionality depending on the January census. So it'll all be picked up, and obviously once we finalise figures, we'll obviously suggest that we will share information with you in terms of what that looks like, just to ensure that we keep going with the visibility approach that we've had up till now.
And this might be covered elsewhere. What sort of schedule are we looking at in terms of that?
So we've got, Catherine, do we know when we're expecting?
Yeah, it's always July, so that they tell us what our adjustment is.
So imminently.
Yeah, imminently, yeah. And we tend to crunch numbers over the summer, and we know in September what's going to happen, and we report on that in October. Right,
okay, so we're looking at the same sort of schedule as last year?
Yes.
Okay. I'm obviously conscious of the pressures on some of the PBIs and the smaller settings in the early years environment due to Corona. So
I think that the earliest we can get the information out, Ian, we will certainly strive to do that, recognising the position. But what we'll do is we'll confirm, we'll let you know once we know that we've got something to work on, and then we can sort of set out the timeline from there in terms of what we're aiming for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Catherine and Lynn. I'm looking for further questions. If there are no further, observation, and it's more relevant to the next item, but our overspend, this isn't something that people have not heard or seen before, but the overspend is very clearly around the high needs block. The most significant item in there is, once again, fees for pupils at independent schools. Forgive me, that but goes back to the comment I made earlier about needing that paragraph to understand what is going on there. And without wishing to sort of flag what we're about to talk about, one of the biggest issues in the figures that we're looking at for this coming year are, guess what? High needs block overspent, and in particular fees at independent schools. So if we note that we were overspent this year by £1.3 million on independent schools, and I think you'll find that figure next year is as large again already. We're only in July. Are there any other comments that colleagues would like to make on the outturn for last year? I can't see any hands up. Then if I may, I'll move on. Thank you, Catherine and Lynn, for that. But if I can ask you again to step up to item 37, revenue monitoring, which hopefully, again, you'll be able to share with us. Great, on screen. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so, okay. As we've just said, high needs block is still a big issue. We've got a cumulative forecast deficit of 4889. The numbers that we, this report is the numbers to the end of June, and we took provisional figures in March as like an early indication, and things have obviously increased slightly since then. As we've said in the report here, COVID-19 has been a big issue where we couldn't progress things that we wanted to, conversations that we wanted to have about independent special schools, placements and things like that. So that's delayed things, unfortunately. But that is the big variances. We've invested in Addington, which is why that figure's gone up, and the independent special schools, we haven't done the work yet. We haven't had the chance yet to do the work that we wanted to with that, which is why that isn't as good as it was looking at in March. So with Addington, I was just going to mention that the funding for them, even though it's a pressure this year, it's actually a lagged funding. So once the census is done in January, that will help next year. So we'll get the income in for the extra places next year. So it's just a pressure this year.
If I may, Paul, it's Sal here. Again, some of these increases at the moment are part of that broader term strategy around responding to the high needs block deficit. As Catherine says, there's an initial outlay now, particularly if we take Addington as an example, which should have a preferential impact on the budgets going forward in terms of those additional spaces and places. That links to some of the other work that we're doing in terms of our broader review of in-borough provision versus independent special school provision out of borough. Yep. So again, as you say earlier, we are still spending on independent, but at the same time we are continuing to invest in ensuring that we've got more space in place within the borough over the next couple of years, or developing over the next couple of years, which will start to have that impact. What we know at the moment is that our EHCP numbers are going up, but our out-of-borough placements are forming a stabilisation, i.e. they're not increasing at the same rate, which is showing that we are already starting to see more of our children being able to be educated within the borough and within our current resources, which again will start to have an impact on reducing that deficit as we go forward. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you. I'm looking for other colleagues who may have. Ginny, hi.
Good morning, everyone. Sal, may I just ask, are all students in Year 6 have a secure place for Year 7 on the high block that could have an impact on the budget going forward, if not?
I know that there are some Year 6 students that we are still searching for at the moment. So, no, Ginny, not all. There is a potential impact in terms of September 21. As yet, we don't know exactly what that's likely to look like, but we're doing everything we can to mitigate that impact and keep as many children within the borough as is possible.
Thank you, Julie. If I can again comment, I think, forgive me for speaking on behalf, I think there's a real understanding that you've got an investment strategy which includes investing in Addington and other resource bases within the borough, and long term that makes a huge amount of sense rather. That I still have this really nagging feeling at the pit of my stomach that the out of borough expenditure is just forgive me, it feels out of control. And whilst I understand that coronavirus may well have delayed actions that you may have wanted to take, to believe that they would have saved 1.5 million, which is what you're now suggesting we're going to overspend, you would have been anticipating some very, very impressive negotiations. And I have great faith in your ability to negotiate, but that does seem to sort of blame that spend on not being able to discuss with others what the future may be. Wow, that's that does seem big. It seems a very, very large number, and so early in the year to be predicting that.
But I think there's also a range of activity in terms of the way in which provision is identified and commissioned that we are changing and responding to in terms of how we source placements for children, which would have had a contributory factor. For example, we have a very, very successful commissioning arrangements in terms of our looked after children placements, and we were looking to shift some of the activity from our SEN team, which are practitioners who are best placed in terms of understanding need, but not necessarily in terms of commissioning places, to a similar arrangement in terms of our operational commissioning arrangements as per our looked after children, so that we can use that experience in terms of the that kind of commissioning work. So there's a whole raft of things, not just in terms of investment in places themselves, but also in the ways in which we operate in order to start to look to reduce some of those costs, look to make sure that we are getting the best value for money, where we do know, and I've mentioned this before, that we will still have to place some children into independent settings in order to effectively meet their needs.
Yeah. Thank you, Sal. Lynn, I think you would like to add a comment.
Yes, thank you, Paul. It was just to add that obviously that 1.5 million figure that you refer to is obviously comparing across the piece the current forecast to the budget. Now, we've obviously discussed in the past that we know that we have to set a balanced budget regardless of the reality. So while I appreciate it is still a movement on the figures that were in the forecast before, it's a £500,000 movement on independence from where we thought we were. The comparison to the budget figure, obviously we know we've almost had to always use that as the balancing figure as we've had to balance regardless of the situation.
Thank you. Yes, I understand that. As part of the, and I know that and there's a compliment to the officer team, who I know over the last year have really been grappling with a strategy for high needs and how you address what appears to be an ever increasing black hole. I know you've got a programme for that, and I know you've been to DFE, you've been you've had very senior strategic conversations about it. I think it would be very helpful if at the next forum meeting, when we again come back to talk about the high needs block, if we can look at the financial plan that accompanies your strategic plan so that we can see how you predict coming back into at least year in year operating balance over the next, I'm picking a number, 3 years. I think that would enable us to understand your longer term plan, recognise that we probably are never going to see that 3 million quid that's sitting there that's gone effectively brought back into play. But I feel that a picture over the longer term would be very helpful. And forgive me for being a little hard, but I think it would also enable us to hold everyone to account to say, well, that's what we plan to do. And if we don't do it, then there's reasons for it. At the moment, I think you are working along that plan, but because we have no visibility, we see a £500,000 added here and there and have no idea whether that exactly ties into what you planned or didn't. So I'd like to see, perhaps by the next meeting, how you see the financial impact over the next 3 years so that we get ourselves back to an in-year balanced budget. And I think that would help us significantly.
Yeah, Paul, totally agree. I mean, the intention always was to have that laid out, and at this meeting for us to be able to really take that detailed conversation. And obviously events over the last few months haven't allowed us to progress that. I think not the value in having that discussion in October is not just what you've said, but it's also about thinking about budget setting for the 21-22 financial year across all blocks of the DSG and what that means and what the balance is. So, yeah, absolutely more than happy that we'll bring that back in October.
Thank you. Can I ask others, having hogged the microphone, as you know I normally do, but having hogged it for a little while, any other comments from colleagues around the table? If there are not, then thank you, Catherine, Lynn, Sal, for that update on revenue monitoring. Could we move on to item 38, which is the contingencies report? Which
yes.
I think is Catherine.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, well, contingency, there's been no call on it this year so far. And that's basically it.
Great, that's fine. Good. Any questions? If not, thank you. If we can move on to item 39. Piers, welcome. This is a growth fund update. Thank you for the detail you shared with us. And I know we have got the pleasure of your company at our next meeting with a much more detailed, more strategic look at planning. But if you could give us an update as to where we are now, we'd be very grateful.
Good morning. Thank you, Paul. Are we going to show the agenda up again, or shall I? It's probably more helpful if we can see the report and the figures.
I'm sure Catherine would look at that. See, no sooner asked than.
Yeah, well, the alternative is looking at me, and that does not bear thinking about.
Compared to Brian, I don't know.
I'm not turning the camera on to give you proof of this. Okay. At the moment, I think the key message that I want to get across is that from our current planning, we expect that we'll be able to deliver the any necessary growth from within the 800,020 budget for the 2021 period. And that's the £800,000 without the £200,000 overspend. Underspend from the last year that's been carried forward. So I think there's, as you pointed out at the beginning, there's still a live issue about what we do about that over the course of this year. I mean, and it may be appropriate that we don't carry forward a significant amount next year. That may be the appropriate way forward, but that's, I think, something I can't answer at this stage. But obviously that then bolsters schools' budgets potentially in the 21 period. Okay, but that is rather dependent on what the outcome of work that's going on at the moment in terms of what 21, 22 and 22, 23 pressures will be. Okay, can we move down a little bit, please? Thank you. Okay. At the moment, we've got 3 maintained primary schools that we're still funding expansion of. We've got 3 established primary academy free schools still going through their growth phase. 1 free secondary school, basically Bohunt, of course, and the pre-opening grants for 3 new primary schools. This is an area where we are still, there'll be some discussion about or development work with the schools concerned exactly what the payment will be required. At the moment, I'm assuming that we will need to make these payments at the moment, but there is an ongoing discussion within Wokingham about the capital programme, which of course underpins the programme. And until we reach the end of that discussion, we can't have absolute certainty about what we will deliver. That's basically the impact of COVID on the council's finances, which extend, of course, through revenue funding into the council's capital programme. In that, the cessation of house building for at least 3 months has meant that Section 106 and other until income has effectively ceased for that period. So that's quite a significant impact on what the council can do, and therefore we're having to review everything that we're doing, including the new schools programme. Okay, so if I move down a little bit, we can just see what the new schools are. Just to remind ourselves, the Aldergrove Primary School. This school finally opened this year, and at the point that we opened it, not merely were the places at the school effectively fully used, so were all the other places in schools in the Shinfield area. So we had eventually seen the growth that we've been expecting related to the housing development. The 2 further primary schools that we've got coming on are the North Wokingham and the Arborfield Primary School. And again, this is an area where there is still an ongoing evaluation of the council's financial position and indeed the need for the schools. But at the moment, we're expecting North Wokingham may be delayed until 21-22 or later, in which case the site will be opened as a community centre, which is being built as part of the primary school development and without the school opening. And the Arborfield development of the school, our current plan is that we should be moving Farley Hill Primary School there. And that's something the council has determined, but it is subject to the process. The likelihood is that we will negotiate with the school precisely what they would require, because obviously if we relocate Farley Hill Primary School, they are already an established school. And therefore we would expect them to have different profile for a brand new school. They already have sufficient economies of scale because they to employ a head teacher, etc. They don't need diseconomy funding, but there may need to be support funding in addition to the capital side of any necessary additional furniture and equipment to fit into the requirements of the school. Okay. We still have an ongoing need potentially, or most certainly, for bulge classes in Key Stage 2, basically. Key Stage 1, we've got more than sufficient capacity at the moment. Localised pressure points. There was a possibility that Woodley would be a pressure point this year because of the spike in births in the year that fed in September 2012. Fortunately, the spike, although the numbers were higher than they were in previous years, it didn't lead to our having to create any additional capacity in the section of Woodley this year. And because this was a single year spike in births, it's unlikely that we will have quite the same pressure next year. It does very much depend, though, of course, as is everything in Wokingham, what happens to the housing market, because Wokingham is undoubtedly an area to which established families move in normal times. But we do have this continuing problem in Key Stage 2. The upper end of juniors, as it were, that's where we have a reasonable expectation that we may want to create some capacity. But that, of course, is going to be subject to discussions with the schools about their particular approach to managing COVID from next September. Do they actually have the space, or is the space that they're going to require because of the need to create distance teaching? But certainly, apart from some very localised pressure points, we now have current reception years 1 and 2 is certainly. Okay, we'll move down financial implications. Super. Yeah, so basically this is, and I think there is an appendix. Was the appendix in back?
Yep,
down?
further down.
Coming up. Oh gosh, that is eminently readable, isn't it? I mean, essentially, the current projected spend is a very, very small. I mean, effectively, it spends the 800,000. That's the simplest way of putting it. There is a contingency in there for additional growth. But there is still this ongoing discussion about what happens with our new school programme, exactly what the costs would be. At the moment, I'm making, for example, on the other field, I'm assuming that the cost would be at the highest level, which is essentially the school. But I think that's probably the estimate of what we need to do. But it is only £30,000. So
Piers, I think you're fading in and out of my sound. It may be for others as well.
Oh dear.
If you could just get a little close, I'll just take a breath and have a go again with the microphone.
Okay.
When we were talking about numbers.
Yeah, okay. I think basically the budget is likely to balance over the course of this financial year. There are a question mark is how much are we going to do? Do we have some additional costs that we wouldn't have predicted in terms of particularly meeting the Key Stage 2 requirements? And I think that's probably our greatest risk area. Other school costs where, although there's a question mark over the capital programme and the 2 new schools, there is the amounts of money that's in the programme are basically at the upper end of what we would require for those schools.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yep, thank you. Can I open to questions? Okay, I'm looking down our list. I've got too many at the moment. If I can just get my peers, thank you. Again, great update, great report. I think we're looking forward to this more fulsome description of how you see the next few years working at our next meeting. And if I look down the figures that we've got, I know you've got 115-ish grand, 114 grand in the new school as in that block as contingency, which is obviously good. Notionally, I appreciate you will be keeping that to see what needs to be done, but that would suggest that you've identified £700,000 of the spend and you've got £100,000 available should things change over the next months before we get to the end of the year.
Whilst that's true, we do have an identified pressure point in Key Stage 2.
Yep.
So this is an ongoing position in Key Stage 2, and one of the problems with it is it's essentially caused by families moving into the borough, and of course we can't, and that is dependent on the housing market. So exactly what the pressure will be is over the course of the year it's something of an open question.
And I presume things like COVID-19 may well have changed what the estate or the movement of families in and out of Wokingham, just generally the movement of families moving house may well have been delayed or pushed forward or changed completely. And I presume
I mean, it will have had two effects on schools, because schools will, of course, be looking at the space that they have, how to achieve safe working arrangements, and of course, therefore, and on families, their ability to move. And if they're not moving into the borough, then of course we won't see that growth in Key Stage 2. There is also a risk with the independent sector, of course. We may see a number of families coming out of the independent sector into the state sector. But that's, again, very much an open field.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm again looking down our list. If there are no further questions, I can't see anybody else with their hand raised, then thank you, Piers. Appreciate that very much. Look forward to seeing you at our next meeting. If we can move from the Growth Fund onto item 40, which is budget consultation, which I think Lynn, Catherine. Sorry, Catherine, you're going to pick this up.
Thank you. Yeah, me again. Okay. So after the success of our Task and Finish group, we have been modelling the past couple of years, and it's just been made the whole process a lot smoother. So obviously we're carrying that on again. Darren has kindly agreed to be chairman of that group again, which is brilliant. We wanted to put together a timeline of what we're proposing to do this year, because in previous years it's been a bit late, our consultation. So we wanted to get schools involved a lot sooner. I'll go scrolling down to what our proposed timeline was, to do an actual initial consultation this side of the summer holidays. But since this meeting, we had a task and finish group meeting on Monday, and we decided really that wasn't possible. So we're going to push it out to the very start of September. So we're going to get the information through from the DfE imminently at the end of July. We can start putting some things together over the summer holidays, meet again with the task and finish group in September, and then send a consultation out right at the beginning of September for schools to reply on the actual the factors in the general principles and the factors in the formula for next year, so they're involved a lot sooner. And then we can consult again when we actually have actual numbers to give out as well to the schools. And then do the same thing, get it approved in January, and we can submit that to the DfE hopefully, and tell our schools all their budget allocations earlier than we have done before at the end of January.
Thank you. And I think I'm right in saying that this change of timetable is to avoid the challenge that we've had for the last couple of years, where we're sending out a consultation on the 10th of December, schools are breaking up on the 16th, 17th, and we want replies by the 8th or 9th of January, which is not really giving everybody the time to consider it. And you're now looking at doing it in effectively 2 steps. Let's see if we can get the principles sorted out early on, i.e. September time, so that we're then just applying the principles to the final numbers. And although people are very interested in the numbers, there should be slightly less consternation when the numbers arrive on the desk as to where did they come from.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you. Darren, any comments from your perspective? I mean, you and Carol and others have shouldered the pressure of coming up with these figures each year.
Yeah, it looks like a very good plan going forward. One thing I would say is that we've lost a couple of members of the task and finish group, so it would be good if we could get, particularly from small primaries, some other members of Forum to join us.
Is that a formal plea now? Because if so, I'm sure we've got people out there who could put their hands up. If yep,
Yeah,
Karina's put her hand up.
So.
Excellent, thank you, Karina. Excellent. And Ben Gobber's put his hand up as well. So, Darren, does that? So there's 2 people who.
That's great. The more the merrier. I think that takes us to about 6 or 7. So maybe one more.
Okay. Again, primary type size.
Yeah, small primaries is ideally what we're after.
Perhaps if one of the head teachers has a particularly outstanding, I mean, you've got plenty of great business managers, but if you've got a business manager who might be prepared to join the group, who doesn't necessarily have to be a member of Forum, that might help. So perhaps if there's any recommendations, that would be welcome from you all. Darren, can I leave you and Catherine and Lynn to pull that together?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing I might ask, we've got a Forum meeting at the beginning of October. I think it would be useful if you could add to your timetable that your feedback that you've gained from the principles that you've sent out to colleagues actually is fed back to Forum at that October meeting, so that we understand the basis upon which you're going to apply the principles to the figures that that DSG or the DfE share with you later on in the year.
Yes, we can certainly do that.
Yeah.
Emma, you've got a question, or is that a volunteering hand?
I'm quite happy to join, and my school business manager will be as well, whichever one of us you would find most useful.
Thank you very much. I will leave you in Darren's capable hands to agree with you how best that works, but thank you for volunteering. So I think I saw Ben and Karina and Emma, Emma's business manager, prepared to join you, Darren. If I can leave that with you and Catherine and Lynn to sort out.
Yep, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for volunteering.
Yep, thank you indeed for volunteering. Are there any further questions on this slightly revised timetable? If not, thank you to that task and finish group. It does seem that that is likely to give us a longer period in which to consider, not that I think there'll be massive changes, but at least to consider and consult people as opposed to rush it over the Christmas turkey. If we can move from item, item 40, onto item 41, which is by way of a little bit of an update and also a substantive item. Lynn, you were going to give us some figures around insurance after the RPA type questions that we'd had a little earlier on this year.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just turn on my camera 1 second. Morning all. So I'm afraid you are going to have to look at my face for this one, as it's a verbal update. So when we last met as a group in March, it had been insurance and the RPA scheme had obviously been a bit of a developing situation in terms of that being opening up to maintain schools. That offer was made after we'd agreed the de-delegated budgets for 2021, just as a reminder. But we had committed to doing some work and we identified some volunteers, thank you all from Forum, to get together and look at that, to work through what it might mean both for individual schools and for the local authority insurance contracts, to inform a more informed discussion around de-delegated budgets and the way forward for the 21-22 financial year. Unfortunately, it's yet another thing in terms of priorities over the last few months that we've not been able to progress those discussions as much as we would like. There has been more information come out, and thank you to Carol in particular for sharing information that I know had been sent round schools, that given them a bit more detail and was a kind of brochure of what the RPA does and what it means. I think that actually the last few months have been a really interesting time. I'm not sure interesting is the right descriptor, but for schools and their use of insurance. So I know loss of income, for example, is a particularly concern across the piece. What insurance has covered and what it hasn't covered, whether the RPA would have been any better in some circumstances around business continuity and loss of income. So while we don't have the more detailed update today that we would like, I actually think that the last few months give us a lot more food for thought in that discussion to ensure that we've got a really informed discussion for schools going forward. So the intention now is that we get that group together as early as possible at the start of the new school term. We will do some work within the council over the summer of pulling all the information together, reviewing feedback we've had, looking at both the wider schemes and the outcome from recent months to inform that meeting. That will then allow us to bring an update to the October forum in terms of where we are, what discussions been made, and that still then allows us time for further information sharing or any consultation or discussion we might want to have with the wider school groups in advance of us thinking about de-delegated budgets at December forum. So apologies, it's not the wider discussion we would have liked of today, and timelines have slipped, but it's certainly, I do think there's some value in the discussions that we've been had and have perhaps, I don't want to speak on behalf of schools, but perhaps there are different considerations around insurance that they might have now that they might not have had a number of months ago.
Thank you, Lynn. I recall at the last meeting Karina and Carol and Sean had agreed to join and support that work. Is that something you've been able to, or you've been able to, appreciate coronavirus hasn't helped very much, but are you going to be able to bring that group into this discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the intention, assuming everyone's still happy to be involved. That's absolutely the intention of that meeting early at the start of the new term. That's exactly what that will be about, bringing us all together to look at where we are, what people's views are, and then that gives us some time to work through anything in advance of October forum.
Thank you.
If there's anyone else wider that wants to get involved as well, there might be others who've got, as I said, got a slightly different view on insurance now. It's probably escalated up people's notice lists a lot. So, if there is anyone that wants to join us in that, then more than happy for that.
I know it's a slightly tangential question, but are there borough approaches to how coronavirus and some of the challenges it might have brought to budgets and loss of income and other either insured or non-insured factors, or is it a little too early yet to see what the borough's trying to do?
So there's a lot of work going on in terms of all of this, in terms of where trends are, what's coming out. You know, the initial period was very much about immediate sustainability for individuals and organisations within our local area that physically needed cash to be able to keep operating during the period. But we're very much looking at and trying to collate, you know, there's a number of issues that schools have encountered. The scheme that the DFE opened in terms of being able to claim back costs, you know, it seems a little limited. Loss of income is not something that has been covered in that. There was an announcement by national government a couple of weeks ago around additional support for local authorities, and particularly around supporting loss of income. Now, we don't have all the detail exactly of what that looks like. It certainly doesn't refer to schools in any way, but it does talk about where there's loss of income, particularly from things like cultural assets, car parks, museums, that sort of thing, that there's the potential that we will be able to submit claims for loss of income above 5% for every 75 pence in the pound. So my question has been, you know, if that scheme is going to be open to local authorities, how do we can we wrap schools up in that? What does that look like? So all of that discussion is exactly what our key priorities are right now, Paul, and being able to work that through and ensure that if there are any opportunities to try and assist schools to mitigate those through as many funding streams as we can look at, then we'll certainly do that. The costs of response to COVID across Wokingham for the council have been in excess of the funding that we've received. So, you know, it is a real consideration about how we ensure sustainability for everybody, while still obviously supporting those most vulnerable.
Thank you. Carol, you've got your hand up if you'd like to ask a question.
Yes, I was just wondering if it would be possible to gather information from schools on insurance in terms of what people have or haven't managed to claim from either the local authority insurance or the RPA schemes. Is that information that would be available?
Yeah, we could certainly put something out and ask that. You know, we have sort of some specific examples where someone, you know, where someone might have come through us or contacted the help desk, and we'll certainly pick that up with insurance colleagues, Carol, but it certainly could be something else. We could put something out through the school's help desk just to ask more broadly and just put that question out to see what information we could gather. Happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the suggestion. Thank you for picking that up, Lynn. Are there any other questions for Lynn or the team on insurance ahead of what will be an update at the next meeting? I've not got a hand up. If not, just before we, thank you, Lynn. Before we move on to the high needs block verbal update, this multimedia centre that I have here, which is a screen, I noticed that Julia has kindly also volunteered to join Darren and the task force looking at funding. So apologies for not picking that up earlier, Julia, and thank you very much for that. Could we move on to item 42, which I think is Sal, which is a high needs block verbal update.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Again, as Lynn said earlier, we had hoped to bring or table a report to this meeting. Unfortunately, with what's been going on over the past few months, some of our attentions have been pulled elsewhere, so we haven't managed to do that. But I'm happy to provide a bit of a verbal update of what we're doing, and that will ultimately also clearly feature into the report for next Schools Forum meeting in October, linking into the broader strategic plan in relation to the higher needs block. So as we've already noted, there is a continuing significant deficit in terms of the higher needs block. That deficit has increased from when previously reported, and some of that increase, though, as I've stated earlier in this meeting, is linked to some of that plan around investment now to reduce longer term costs in the future. Colleagues will be aware that for some period now we've been undertaking a review of our resource base arrangements and reviewing the development of our funding model around specialist resource bases, and the aim there is around to have a kind of a one needs-led matrix in place for all of our providers. So starting with our resource bases to make sure that actually we are funding appropriately, but also linking that to the nature and the complexity of needs of individual children. Clearly, we will need to continue to provide some underpinning support in that, but we need to think of a model which is much more child need led. It should also help us in terms of a consistency of approach, and also our understanding, monitoring and recording of need versus spend, which will make sure that we are much more mature in terms of our understanding. So we're undertaking currently a whole load of moderation activity around that needs assessment work. We've also, as I mentioned earlier, agreed a new funding model and linked to the expansion of Addington School, which will increase some of the places that we're enabled to do locally within borough, where it's appropriate to do so. And as I said previously as well, what we're seeing is an increase in our need, but not a corresponding increase in terms of children going outside of borough. That's beginning to stabilise, and our longer term plan is that begins to reduce as we have better and more provision within the borough. Colleagues will also be aware that we are developing, in partnership with Reading Borough Council, I made earlier the development of a new special school, which will be in Wokingham. In Winnersh, we're looking for that for 2022-23. And again, that's likely to be an all-through school, which again will have a really significant impact on the volume and the quality of places that we're able to provide within the borough for Wokingham learners. We've been working with the Regional School Commissioner's Office, the Northern House School Trust and Chiltern Way Academy Trust in terms of the arrangements for Northern House School. And I'm pleased to share with colleagues that from November 1st of this year, Chiltern Way Academy Trust will be the new academy sponsor for Northern House School. And we're undertaking a whole host of development work around the school, both in terms of responding to their continuous improvement agenda and also that seamless transfer from one provider to another. Again, I think that's a really welcome development in terms of the whole Wokingham system. Other elements that we're looking at is the development of an inclusion support service. So we were looking at how we can work with colleagues such as Addington School, such as Foundry College, on the development of a inclusion support service that can provide further outreach engagement from those settings into our mainstream and academy schools as appropriate. We are revisiting alongside the, as I was saying, the resource-based needs-led funding matrix, but also a review of the nature of our specialist resource centres and how we can provide for additional or new resource-based provision to assist us in meeting needs. Other elements that's happening is we're also reviewing our home to school transport arrangements with a specific focus on how do we ensure that we've got the appropriate and right arrangements in place for our Scnd learners, so children with special educational needs and disabilities, in order to meet their transport needs in a way that it both enables their appropriate access into education in school as per our legislative responsibilities, but also do it in a cost-effective way in respect of the impact that that has on the high needs block. We're also looking, and that will include things like reviewing our policy. So we're doing a piece of co-production work at the moment in terms of the redevelopment of our home to school transport arrangements. We're looking at the introduction of a dynamic purchasing system, so the commissioning arrangements, to make sure we get the most value out of our commissioning arrangements. Updating our route optimization, so understanding the nature of how children and young people travel within the borough and across the borough, as well as sort of increasing the capacity within our delivery teams to make sure that we can deliver the service that we need to deliver in order to constrain cost but still meet need. So there's a whole raft of activity there. As part of our written statement of action, we're also re-reviewing ordinarily available and graduated approach arrangements. So thinking about what are the things that are there to support children with SEN and SEND in advance of any need for any HCP. Are we getting that right? So the whole system is inclusive end to end in terms of that review, to make sure that the provision that we are collectively providing for this cohort of vulnerable learners is the right one, that enables them to engage in borough, engage in the quality learning experience, and also has an impact in terms of reducing the deficit, because we're actually managing our spend in a much, much more effective manner and a more cost efficient manner. So I think all of that work, the rest of the work that's going on in terms of the written statement of action, so understanding our management information, our co-production activity, the work in terms of the timeliness and quality of our EHCPs, all of that will contribute as part of our broader strategy for improvement across our whole SEND agenda, which clearly should have, as I said, that massive impact, hopefully, in terms of the higher needs block. Clearly, what we'll look to do is provide that in a much more accessible form in terms of a report for the next meeting, but hopefully that gives colleagues a good flavour of the range of activity that we're engaged in, the things that we're looking to come into line over the next 12, 18, 24 months that will have the impact that we desire within Wokingham. As you say, this is a problem that's built up over a number of years. It's not a problem necessarily of Wokingham's making. There are a whole range of factors that have contributed to where we are, but there's a whole range of stuff that we can be doing both as a local authority and as a broader learning sector in order to mitigate against some of the challenges that we see. Hopefully that's been a useful update.
Thank you, Sal. Yes, it was. I'm looking for yes, that sounded a comprehensive and cohesive programme of ambition. And if you can turn that into a document that you can share with us, and if the numbers can be there to support it and show how over 2 or 3 years that's going to play through into effectively a balanced in-year programme, wow, that would be amazing, absolutely amazing. The first time I think this group will have seen anything of that strength and comprehension. We look forward to seeing that. I'm looking round for others who may have questions for Sal from his update. Sal, so comprehensive, mate, that nobody's asking you for it. It was. Thank you. That was.
Thank you, colleagues.
Reassuring and fulsome. Thank you. If there are no further questions for Sal, and obviously we look forward to seeing that report the next time round, so you're setting yourself up for a challenge in October.
Nothing new there.
Indeed. If I can move from item 42, which is high needs block verbal update, onto item 43, which is our forward programme. It was attached to the back of the agenda. There are the regular items on there. We've got a growth fund update from peers. We'll have a high needs block plan programme from Salamatine. we should also have the school admissions terms of reference. If that could go out as a paper, and therefore we spend as little time, I don't mean it unkindly, but as little time as possible repeating it on the screen, and therefore can just have questions, I think that would save us some time at the meeting. We'll have the update from the Task and Finish group on the 2021 budget. We've got the update from Lynn on insurance. I do wonder whether we might need an agenda item for COVID, whether there's a sort of, whether we could ask you to pull, and I don't know who the you is, Sal, whether it's yourself or Lynn and Catherine, to pull something together so that we can understand the borough's approach to schools, schooling, and the impact of the coronavirus.
Absolutely, we can put that in place, Paul.
Thank you. Are there any other issues, and that's quite a long list, by the way, for that meeting, and especially if it's going to be a virtual meeting. Are there any other issues that colleagues would like to add to that forward programme, or are we comfortable that that covers the issues that are important for us at the moment?
Sorry, can I just ask, Sal, we were looking at setting up a school admissions task and finish group to discuss all the guidelines and behind it. Is that still going ahead, or are we not now? Because I just think the longer we leave it, we're going more and more into other years before we actually sort out the problems that we do have regarding admissions.
Yeah. Absolutely, Brian. And yes, the plan is that is still going to go ahead.
Do we know when?
No, not off the top of my head at the moment. But yes, it is going to go ahead. I can assure you of that.
Great, thank you.
Did we have some volunteers for that group, Brian? Forgive me.
Me?
Yeah, I do have a number of colleagues that have already identified, both from the previous arrangement when it was a school admissions forum. Colleagues from there have also expressed an interest in continuing on into the Task and Finish group, and some of the colleagues have also expressed an interest to join. But again, as Darren said earlier, the more the merrier. So if other colleagues would be keen, more than happy for them to let me know.
Thank you, Brian. We've got Nick McSweeney was prepared to. Thank you, Nick. I'm hoping that's still okay. Shirley was also prepared to join, and Karina as well. Karina, you're going to be spending a huge amount of your time supporting these groups. Thank you very much for that. As Sal said, if there's anybody else, if you could ping a little note to either directly to Sal or to Luciana so that she can pick that up and pass it in, and we can build that Task and Finish group. Excellent. And thank you for bringing that up, Brian. If there are no other items on the forward programme, I'll move on to any other business. I've got a couple of items on any other business. You may recall that a year ago we rearranged the membership to better represent the transition from maintained schools to academies. We made a commitment that we would review that every year. Democratic Services will undertake that process over the next 60 days, or how many days is before our next meeting, such that they can come to the next meeting with an update. My guess would be that if the changes are minor, we may not want to make significant change. But if the changes have been significant, then clearly we will want to reflect that in a revised membership. We will also table the possibility of having a further training session. You may recall we held, I can't remember when it was it January or February of this year? And that went down, I think, fairly well. So again, we would probably look at holding a training session, possibly towards the Christmas meeting. And you never know, turn out a few mince pies to go with it as well. And also, we put out a questionnaire last year to ask you if School Forum was meeting your expectations, and if it wasn't, what else could we do? I hope that we've implemented many of those, but we're likely to put out that same questionnaire or a similar one again to get your feedback, to understand and make sure that we're continuing to make School Forum relevant, appropriate, all those other good terms, and not just a loss of an hour and a half or 2 hours every 2 or 3 months. So those were my pieces. I've got one more that I want to add at the end, but can I go round, for want of a better word, the table, and ask if colleagues have anything. So Ben, have you got anything that you would like to add as AOB? No, if not, Brian.
No, thank you. No.
Okay. Brian, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks.
Carol?
Yes, I'm okay.
Karina?
Yeah, all okay with me.
Thank you. Darren?
Yes, I'm fine. Thanks.
Thank you. Emma?
I'm fine, thank you. Fine.
Ginny?
No other business, thank you.
Ginny. Graham?
Yes, may I have 42 seconds, please?
At least. Please go on.
Of course, the last few months have been extremely challenging, and that's a very common expression. But I would like to make the observation for the purpose of the minutes, and this being a public meeting, that the heads and their teams have done a great job in keeping our children educated and in the preparations that are going forward for September and back to school. And I think it's worthy of note in the minutes, if I may.
Excellent, Graham. Thank you very much. And as a non-head teacher, I'd love to echo that as well. Hopefully there's a few colleagues around the table who are grateful for that comment. Thank you. Excellent, Graham. Thank you very much. Helen, anything you'd like to add? AOB? No, I think Helen's probably okay. Ian?
No, all good from me.
Jay? Hello, Jay.
Good morning. No, nothing from me, thanks.
Catherine?
No, nothing for me.
Luciana, I can see nothing on my little screen, so I'm hoping you're okay. Lynn?
I've just one thing sprung to mind actually, Paul. We talked before about running another training session for Forum before the October meeting. It was just to get a gauge whether that's something that we'd still be interested in, and whether we might want to do something similar to what we ran in March, or whether we wanted to build on that. So it's not necessarily an answer for today, but if anyone's got any feedback or any thoughts on that, then we'd be happy to take that on board.
Thank you, Lynn. I think we'll try and wrap that up in the sort of democratic services review that we do of, are we doing the right job and do we need some extra training? But
okay,
based upon the feedback I think we all received at that meeting, I think there is a real clamour for another one of those sessions. And we might want to find a different name than training, because it was a much better meeting than a training meeting.
Great. Thank you, Paul.
Madeline, anything from Democratic Services? I think you're sitting next door with Luciana at the moment. Are you okay?
Nothing from me.
Thank you. Ali?
Nothing from me, thanks.
Thanks, Ali. Julia?
Nothing from me, thank you.
And Nick?
Yeah, nothing from me, thanks, Paul.
Piers, if you're still with us.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, you may have seen a name that's unfamiliar to most of us on the list. Nikki Rain has joined us as an observer for the meeting. She works for the ESFA and I believe is looking at how virtual meetings are working in the current environment. Nikki, is there anything that you would like to add from your observations?
Hi, hello. No, not at all. It's been a great meeting. I've really enjoyed it. It's been very well chaired and I've really enjoyed listening to what everybody has to say. So thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nikki. Sarah?
No, nothing from me. Thanks.
And Shirley?
Just to echo what Graham said, I think we've done fantastic in Wokingham because we have been above the national average for children attending schools and actually the schools remaining open. I think that's important to note as well. So thank you to all my colleagues and the local authority for their support.
Great feedback. Thank you. Sal, you've got your hand up. Is there anything you'd like to raise?
Yeah, just similarly, I just wanted to extend my gratitude to Schools Forum and to all of our schools and settings for all of the hard work. It's been the longest term in history because it's gone on since February. And I just want to say a massive thank you to everybody for your continued commitment to all children and young people across the borough, the support you've provided, particularly to our most vulnerable. You've done it in good faith, in good cheer, and I just want to ask you all to make sure that you do take some time over the summer to recharge your batteries. I know planning for September is important, but it's really important that you keep yourselves well as well. So thank you very much.
Great. Alan, anything from your end?
Nothing from me.
Okay, and then and I ended on you, Alan, not because you're actually top of my list, but also, colleagues, you may not be aware, but Alan, having contributed significantly to the team over the last period of time, I think this is either your last meeting or almost maybe even your last day today with Wokingham. If so, it's a big thank you from all of us for the support that you've given us and the team. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, and thanks to all members of our forum for being so understanding.
Well, even at the accent. Yeah, you're right. No problem. Colleagues, if there's nothing more, can I thank you all for joining us and close the meeting. Have a great summer and look forward to talking to you again in October. Thank you all.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Bye.